Lesson 4, Theme Matters. In this lesson, we're going to talk about why theme matters and why it's important to consider the theme when you are nearing the end of a book. So you guys are almost finished with Maniac, Magee, and it's very easy when we finish books to close them, put them back on our shelf, and never think about them again. But good readers, when they finish books, they consider the theme. So what is theme? In realistic fiction, novels or books, they usually contain an author's message about a topic, and this message is called a theme. When we consider the theme, it's really helpful to ask yourself, what might the author want me to learn as a person? Also, you could ask yourself, how should I change as a person after reading this book? So there's 3 steps to identifying a theme that I want to talk about. So step 1 is to identify one topic in the story. A topic is usually just 1 or 2 words. Step 2, revisit parts of the book that demonstrate this topic. Consider the recurring events. Step 3, think about the recurring events and specific details from the book and determine the author's message or theme. Okay, my turn. So step 1, we know that we're going to identify a topic in the book. One of the topics that we see throughout Maniac, Magee is the topic of death and dying. So after I identified a topic, I thought to myself, where might I return to in Maniac, Magee to see this theme? Well, the first part of the story, we know that Maniac's parents die. So let's return to chapter 1 and reread this part to see what we can learn about the topic of death and dying. Maniac Magee was not born in a dump. He was born in a house, a pretty ordinary house, right across the river from here in Bridgeport. And he had regular parents, a mother and a father, but not for long. One day his parents left him with a sitter and took the P&W high-speed trolley into the city. On the way back home, they were on board when the P&W had its famous crash, when the motorman was drunk and took the high trestle over the Schuylkill River at 60 miles an hour, and the whole caboodle took a swan dive into the water. And just like that, Maniac was an orphan. He was 3 years old. Of course, to be accurate, he wasn't really Maniac then. He was Jeffrey Lionel Magee. Little Jeffrey was shipped off to his nearest relatives, Aunt Dot and Uncle Dan. I'm going to stop here, but we know that in the rest of this chapter, Maniac hates living with his aunt and uncle, and by the end of the chapter, he runs away. Now, there's another part of the story that I want us to return to, and that's chapter 32, and this is the chapter where Grayson dies. So let's reread this part of the book and ask ourselves, what can these details tell us about our theme? What might we learn about death and dying? Most mornings, Grayson would be the first one out of bed. He would turn on the space heater, visit the bandshell lavatory, then heat up some water, get breakfast ready, and finally wake the boy with a gentle shake of the shoulder. On December 30th, it was the silence that woke Maniac and the cold. The space heater wasn't on. No steaming cup sat on the table. The old man was still under the covers. Maniac went over. "Grayson?" He shook the old man. "Grayson?" He took the old man's hand. It was cold. "Grayson?" He didn't run to the superintendent's office. He didn't run to the nearest house. He knew. He held the cold, limp hand that had thrown the pitch that had struck out Willie Mays, that had betrayed the old man's stoic ways by giving him a squeeze. He began talking to the old man about places he had been on the road, about places the two of them might have gone to, about everything. Then he began to read aloud. He read aloud all the books the old man had learned to read, and he finished with the old man's favorite, Mike Mulligan's steam shovel. When he looked out the window, it was night. He dragged his chest protectors alongside the old man's mat and lay down. Only then, when he closed his eyes, did he cry. So I'm going to pause here, and we know in the rest of the chapter they hold a funeral for for Grayson, I'm sorry. And we know by the end of the funeral, Maniac does not want to see Grayson get buried and be disrespected by the workers. So Maniac runs. So what are we noticing about Maniac when he encounters death and dying? Well, we know in the first scenario he's only 3 and he doesn't get to say goodbye to his parents. Whereas here in chapter 32, when Grayson dies, he sits with him and he talks with Grayson and he reads books aloud to Grayson almost as if to say goodbye, even though Grayson is already gone. So when we come back to our recurring events, in the beginning of the book, Maniac's parents die and he has to learn how to deal with their death. Later on, Grayson dies and Maniac also has to try to deal with his death. But we know that each time that Maniac encounters something difficult, he runs away. And after there's a death in Maniac's life, he does begin some new adventure or encounter new scenarios. So now we have to ask ourselves, what might the author want us to learn about death and dying? Maybe the author wants us to know that death is difficult to deal with, but it can also be the beginning of something new, a new adventure. Your turn. Death is one of the topics in Maniac Magee. Can you identify another topic that is covered? On the right-hand side, type your response. Some of the possible topics that you came up with could be running away, racism, segregation, prejudice. That's when you judge somebody before you actually know them. And kindness. So now you're going to choose just one of the topics from the book. Then ask yourself, what parts of the book might I return to in order to reflect on that topic? So say you chose running away. Can you think about events that occurred in the book where Maniac runs away? Maybe you chose racism. What parts of the book might you return to that discuss racism? On the right-hand side, type your response. For this week's collaboration, you are going to choose one topic discussed in the book. Again, that topic can be running away, racism and segregation, prejudice, kindness, family. Second, you're going to list the recurring events and specific details about that topic. Last, you're going to ask yourself, what does the author want me to learn about this topic? How does the author want me to change as a person after reading this book? I'm excited to read your collaborations.